Hi, everyone. May I have your attention? We're already a little bit delayed. I know that the convention center is big and people have to walk between rooms. So I'm sorry that we are starting 10 minutes late, particularly to Abidemi and Camila, who are already online. They've been online for more than 20 minutes. So welcome to our panel. It's a pleasure to have our first in-person event since 2019, I think, at the ASSA meetings. So we have 6 distinguished speakers and about 75 minutes for presentations and discussion, followed by our reception. So let us get started. Okay, so will this move? Oops. You can go now. Yeah, okay, all right. So here are some photos from last night's rally. Some of you were there. It was organized by AFFE, IRPI, ISAPI, is that how you pronounce it? I'm not sure. And IAFFE for associations. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mary Wren and Paddy Quick for their efforts and for all their work in organizing the rally. So we handed out leaflets that were titled "Economists Demand Reproductive Rights," and abortion is an economics issue. And I picked out these 2 particular, so they were very nice, excellent pamphlets, banners. And I was thinking that I could have actually framed the whole presentation for this opening statement using those banners and just putting next to them research findings and references next to each banner. So that would have been a good way, but it was only last night that I took the photos. So I picked a few of them that I will use throughout this presentation. And these are the 2 that I would like to start with, because abort homo economicus has been what the feminist economics project been about. And through that, it enables us to frame abortion as an economics issue and as a feminist economics issue. So what I would like to do today, before I give the floor to our speakers in this opening statement, is to touch upon 3 issues. First of all, present a framework in which we can look at bodily and reproductive rights and reproductive justice as an issue of economic justice. And second, look at why we need a global perspective on this, going in parallel with the theme of this panel. And thirdly, I will finish off with some insights from the context in Turkey, which is where I'm based, where I'm from. And then we will continue with other countries and other regions that our speakers will talk about. So let me first start with a framework. The issue or the sphere of social reproduction has been central to feminist economics, and with it, the associated concepts of reproductive labor, starting with Marx and Engels, the reproductive sphere, going on to unpaid work, domestic work, caring labor, household production, care economy, and going clockwise, actually, it shows an evolution in terminology, in conceptualization, starting from early years of feminist economics to the 2000s and 2010s. So feminist economists, some of them in this room, have been leading thinkers in conceptualizing, developing measures for these different forms of work and production, and also for frameworks of analysis. And one of the contributions of feminist economics is to show how through the gender division of labor, what happens in the sphere of social reproduction is linked to the market economy at different levels, at the micro level of individual decisions of women to participate in the labor market, or constraints of women to participate in the labor market as distinct from men, paid care work, labor market attachment, gendered employment patterns, and gender gaps, the consequent gender gaps in income, earnings, social security, in pensions at later stages of life, through vertical segregation, gender gaps in decision-making, how these are linked to the area of social reproduction, poverty, which feminist economists have differentiated as time and income poverty, and then combined into the concept of consumption poverty, which includes not only consumption of market purchase goods, but also household produced goods and services. And also one of the important breakthroughs in the feminist economics project has been what one of our dear colleagues, Nilüfer Çağatay, who unfortunately we lost recently. And let me take this moment to pay a tribute to her. What Nilüfer and her colleagues called the Engendering Macroeconomics Project. Linking of what happens at the micro and meso levels to what happens at the aggregate level of human capital, productivity, the quality of growth, and the inclusiveness of growth, sustainability of growth, and also macro phenomena such as public budget balances, fiscal spending, capital account deficits, macro policies, and financial balances, and so on. So all these feedback mechanisms, these two-way causations between these two spheres have enabled the identification of the linkages between reproductive justice and economic justice. And in general, when we look at the feminist economics literature, the issue is framed as an issue of allocation of time between paid and unpaid work, and the magnitude of unpaid work, its reduction, and its redistribution across two dimensions between the private sphere of households and the public sphere of markets and public services, and also within the private sphere, its redistribution from women to men. So in as an outcome of all this analysis, recently we have calls for new economic and social models, Caring Economy by the UK Women's Budget Group, Caring Democracy by John Tronto, a feminist political scientist, Caring Society recently in a very important document that came after the women's conference that Alicia maybe can talk about it from UNECLAC, and what I call the purple economy, the vision for not only a caring, but also a gender egalitarian economy and economic and social order. So where does the issue of bodily and reproductive rights fit into this framework? Well, it fits in actually immediately at the core of social reproduction, because access to bodily and sexual rights lies at the core of an enabling environment and egalitarian social reproduction framework, or its lack, therefore. So it's through that it builds into this all these feedback mechanisms. So it affects the allocation of time, and it affects allocation of time not only through producing more care work, but I'm sure Caitlyn, I think what Caitlyn will talk about, Caitlyn Myers will talk about, also in terms of specific contexts such as the US of abortion bans, in terms of travel time to states where abortion is accessible, and waiting periods, and all that, how that changes time allocation patterns and the associated financial and economic outcomes. But it also works through its impact on women's physical and mental health, and also women's abilities to invest in their education, with implications for social reproduction as well as for the market sphere. So coming on to the aspect of the global perspective on this issue, here we have a global map of abortion laws, and the red circles indicate the regions and the countries that our speakers will be discussing today. The United States is red and blue, a mixture of bans and abortion being accessible. The blue is accessible on request and red is prohibited under all circumstances. And then you have the various various colors, yellow and light pink, showing the various degrees of access to abortion. So the global perspective is useful in a number of ways, in 3 ways, actually, I would like to point out. One of them is that given this variety of access to abortion, also generally speaking, to reproductive and bodily rights and health services, it provides for researchers actually an environment where we can observe a variation of policy implementation and access to health and reproductive care services, healthcare services, and therefore measure or study, explore the implications of this variation in policy on various outcomes. And secondly, it's important because one of the dimensions of intersectional inequalities is actually between women living in the global south versus the global north. And let me give you some statistics on this. First of all, data and research show that whether abortion is legal or not, it happens. So restricting access does not prevent people from seeking abortion. It just makes it more deadly. And actually we had some banners on this from yesterday, from last night as well. So annually, according to statistics by World Health Organization, annually half of pregnancies are around 120 million are unintended per year. More than half of unintended pregnancies end up in induced abortion. 45% of all abortions are unsafe, and 97% of all unsafe abortions are in the global south. More than half of all unsafe abortions occur in Asia, particularly in South and Central Asia. And in Latin America and Africa, approximately 3 out of 4 all abortions are unsafe. And in terms of ratios of women dying for unsafe abortions, 30 women die for every 100,000 unsafe abortions in the global north, and the figure rises to 202 deaths for women in the global south. So this is definitely one of the axes, but as our speakers will take the floor, they will tell you about how these inequalities that we observe between the global north and global south are replicated at the national level in the US, at the state level in Louisiana, at the regional level in Europe and in Africa and Latin America. So finally, another important insight that the global perspective provides us with is that the politics of abortion is increasingly of a global nature. And particularly the anti-gender movement that we are observing has increasingly grown into an international alliance. And I'm not sure how those of you who are based in the US, how much of this you feel or you pick up, but those of us who are based in the global south are picking it up in a major way. An interesting case of this is Turkey. Turkey was, as you can see, is blue on the map right here. But the fact that it's blue, and also Italy is blue on the map, Marcella will talk about Italy, the fact that we have de jure access to abortion doesn't mean that it's de facto. So abortion has been legal and accessible through the public and private health system in Turkey since the 1980s. But in the early 2010s, the president has come up with a policy initiative to ban abortion. And the language and the discourse that was put forth in the public agenda felt very alien. It felt very not indigenous, not native, but it felt very imported. And those of us with familiarity with the US context could sort of read into that translation. Although I think there's more research, some sort of investigative journalism, or I don't know, feminist research that needs to be done, tracking the linkages, because I don't have the evidence to provide you with. But looking at the meetings of World Convention of Families, Alliances of Families, we can tell that there's some imports of this ideology from the US into some countries of the global South, by conservative movements, of course, in the global South from the US. So this initiative was pulled back due to widespread protests, but particularly from the constituencies of Erdogan himself, of the president himself, from the female constituencies. And I think that was a success of the women's movement in Turkey, because we were able to build those alliances. But research shows that although the abortion remains still legal, de jure, de facto, the public health officials are increasingly wary of providing abortion services, and they use their right to conscientious objection not to provide abortion services. So it has really become an issue of access for women with, who live in central regions, in rural areas, and with lower resources. So on that note, I would like to finish with some insights from a qualitative research study in Turkey that was undertaken by a feminist organization, Women for Women's Human Rights. Unfortunately, it's at the bottom, so you cannot see it. It's a feminist organization, which I've had the honor of being involved with. I'm one of also the founding members. So most of the economics research uses quantitative data, but this research with the focus groups and the in-depth interviews actually also is an example of how qualitative research can be quite enriching in terms of putting a spotlight on the complex realities. And I picked 3 quotes. The first quote is about a woman in her 50s speaking back on the abortion experience in her mid-30s, talks about how she wanted the baby, but she was forced by her husband to have the abortion, which is, not the type of situation that we're used to. So she was angry about that. And then she went to a public hospital asking for the abortion, and the hospital told her that they cannot perform it because it's illegal, which is not true, because in Turkey it's always been legal. So it was a public hospital. She eventually had the abortion through a private institution, but she talks about this dilemma of being frustrated and angry with her husband, who forced her into the abortion. But once she decided she was going to follow on her husband's lead, going to the public hospital, and the public hospital telling her that she cannot have the abortion. And she talks about how it was her body, but everybody else had the say on her body except for herself. And 15 years later, she's still mad about this. She's expressing this, and the implications for, for mental health. The second quote is about religion and interpretations of religion. This is a woman in her 30s who defines herself as a conservative religious Muslim. And she says, as a Muslim, I need to ask myself, can I afford to have a child? Can I afford it physically, financially, and emotionally? And only if I can afford it, I should have it. That would make me a good Muslim. So that goes to show that her interpretation of what a good Muslim is quite different from what our president would like to believe. And the third quote is, in a more future-looking perspective, is about the research also did a whole section on the pill, on the abortion pill, as a strategy to overcome the obstacles that have to do with surgery abortions. And one of the findings was that there was widespread lack of information, disinformation, and misinformation about the pill. So I will leave that on that note, and we move on to Caitlyn for the U.S. context. Yes, please. Okay, here you go.
Hey, y'all, it's lovely to be here. Is this on? Maybe not. Yeah. I really appreciate the chance to have this international perspective on this issue. And I also kind of appreciate the juxtaposition. I'm coming home to broaden my perspective. I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana. I went to college here, so I'm coming home. And we're having these amazing conversations. So I'm an applied microeconomist. I hope I have some slides in here. There we go. I'm an applied microeconomist. I primarily study the effects of abortion access and abortion policy on people's lives. And my job today is to just set the stage for y'all about recent developments in the United States context. So I like data, so I'm going to start with a map that I made. This is a map of the United States. Each little dot on it is an abortion facility that was open and providing abortions as of May 1st of 2022. And every county is shaded according to the travel distance, driving distance to the nearest abortion facility. So in, and I don't know if you can see the legend, but the darkest color is more than 250 miles. The lightest color is less than 50. So in May, the average person of childbearing age in the United States was about 25 miles from the nearest abortion facility. And while there is a swath across the Midwest where they're more than 250 miles, it's not a very populated region. Less than 1% of the US population was more than 200 miles from a provider. Of course, I don't think I'm announcing anything new. Then something huge happened this summer. In the Dobbs decision, the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe and Casey. And the effect was to return the power to ban abortions to US states. And some of the states acted very swiftly. In fact, some of them had trigger laws on the book that were written to be triggered by such a decision and immediately ban abortions. So this is a map, it's off the edge a little, sorry, but this is a map of the current landscape. It actually hasn't changed much since November 1st. This is the current landscape of abortion access following the Dobbs decision. Right now, 13 states are enforcing total bans. Georgia's also enforcing a 6-week ban. And about a quarter of the US population has experienced an increase in travel distance. For that population, the nearest abortion facility is now for the average person in that population, about 300 miles away. The states that are outlined in red are the states enforcing total bans. The providers that closed are red. This isn't the end. We're watching legislation and litigation play out, including following the midterm elections. Prognosticators can differ, they can argue. I'll take a prognostication that combines predictions from the Guttmacher Institute and the Center for Reproductive Rights on the states that are most likely to enact total bans. I have removed Michigan from that list following a ballot initiative that was passed in November that makes it much, much harder to ban abortion in Michigan. And so this prediction is that when the dust settles, abortion will be banned in about 24 states. Now, the dust is still very much up in the air. But if this is the point that we reach, about 40% of the US population is going to be affected. And most of them are, again, about 300 miles from the nearest provider. I'll mention too, I didn't have time to go into this, but if you love abortion data, I have a new dashboard where I am publishing data at the census tract level on changing distances to providers. And also I'm surveying appointment availability at providers to measure congestion. And those data are all available for download. I can't write every paper there is to write. So like, please, y'all, write these papers. So the question really is what comes next? Like, what happens now that these bans are playing out across the country? Well, the first order effect is probably on pregnant people seeking abortions. And I'll give a talk at a session on Sunday afternoon if you want all of the technical details on how I estimate this. But a lot of my work recently has been focused on estimating how many people seeking abortions make it out of a banned state and how many people are likely to be trapped by distance and poverty and unable to reach providers. And the bottom line prediction is that about 3/4 of the pregnant people trying to get out will get out. That doesn't mean it will be easy. It doesn't mean they might not be delayed or have stories to tell about effects on their financial lives or abuse they were subject to or jobs they lost. I mean, there's going to be a lot of stories to tell. But the evidence is about 3/4 of them will find a way to get out. That means that about 1/4 of people of reproductive age who are affected by these bans are likely trapped by distance. And it's happening right now, right? Right now, abortion is banned in Louisiana and the nearest providers are hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And by the way, they don't have any appointments available anyway. You have to go farther. So right now that's happening. And right now people are trapped. Some of them are self-managing abortions, which is not always unsafe. But based on what we can see in recent data, most of them go on to give birth as a result. And we are talking here really about an inequality story. As an upper middle class woman with a PhD in a car, if I need healthcare that's a couple hundred miles away, I'll get in my car and drive there. If my teenage daughter needs healthcare a couple hundred miles away, I'll drive her too. The people who are trapped are disproportionately the poorest, the most vulnerable, the most credit constrained of an already poor, vulnerable, credit constrained population. Most of them are already parenting. Most of them are going to give birth. We haven't seen a shock to abortion access in the United States like this in 50 years. And so I would ask, I think we all, economists who work in this area, should be thinking about measuring these effects as they begin to play out. Because right now, I think we can all guess what the effects are in people's lives, and we have some good evidence from the Turnaway study. But really, the next step is going to be to measure the economic fallout because of this inequality in access to reproductive health care. I'll stop there.
Left your slide because
Oh, do you want?
Yeah,
Feel free to click back.
we can leave that Louisiana slide right on up here because I'll be presenting on Louisiana. So I'm originally from Oakland, California, but all of my ancestors were born here in Louisiana. And I do this presentation really for my great aunt that I got to know, who lived to be 106 and was born in 1898. And in 1898, when she was born here in the state of Louisiana, she was misdiagnosed and was forced to have her uterus taken from her while a baby was still there. And so I do this in many ways. She was born in Grambling, Louisiana, and I do this really for her because she fought vehemently once she moved to California around reproductive rights. And so for us to be almost back in the exact same place is kind of scary. And so I want to start off with I want to actually start off on the idea of carrying a baby to term as we back up a little bit to where we are now. And the reason I want to do that is because NPR, we made national news here in the state of Louisiana on December 29th, 2020. The article states this: bleeding and in pain, she couldn't get 2 Louisiana ERs to answer the question, is she having a miscarriage? Okay. And I want to start there because when we're talking about this abortion ban, we often think about just abortions. We're not thinking about, in many ways, maternal health all the way around and collectively. And here in the state of Louisiana, before, as you can see here on this map, and that's why I asked to keep the map up, before the ban, there was only 3 abortion centers in the state to begin with. And it was actually safer here in the state of Louisiana to get an abortion than to actually have a baby, because the maternal the maternal morbidity rate here in the state is 31.6%. It is the only 2 states that are behind them are Tennessee, Tennessee and Alabama at 44% and 34.6% respectively. So I just want that to sink in for a moment, that it was safer here, even just with these 3, it was safer to have an abortion here in this state than it was to even have a baby. And that is then presented in this national news story that we get after the Christmas holiday about a woman who is trying to have a baby, who can't get any facility to let her know if she's having a miscarriage or not, because Louisiana had a trigger law. So as soon as abortion was banned then by the federal government, it was a snapback, and it then triggered this ban, a complete ban, unless the life of the mother is at stake. And with that, the penalties are fairly high. If you are caught giving this abortion, it's a $100,000 fine or jail time and the potential loss of your license. So that is why this story is a big deal, right? And what you're tracking is huge, because if you look around the state of Louisiana, you'll notice that there is really nowhere for women to go. The closest facility really is in New Mexico. Okay, the closest facility is in New Mexico. So I want that to kind of sink in for if I'm trying to even get maternal health care in the state, it's fairly difficult. We also see, and the reason I wanted to keep the map up, and I think it's great, is that, well, not great that the map is so horrible, but great that the map is here for us to look at, right? Is that mothers and children in states with the toughest abortion restrictions tend to have less access to health care and financial assistance overall. So the actual separation or wealth gap throughout the nation, or the median income is $784,000, but in the state of Louisiana, it's $50,800. Okay, so I want you to think about, number one, the fact that it was safer here in the state of Louisiana to have an abortion than to have a baby. Then I want you to think about the fact that they on average are making $20,000 less than the rest of the country. And then I want you to think of the distance that any person, regardless of their financial situation, would have to travel to then get this abortion, right? It's sinking in, I think, how difficult this is. Where we do see hope, I would say, is, and we were talking about this before I stepped up, where we do see some kind of hope in the state of Louisiana is Georgia. And the reason that we see hope, particularly in Georgia, is because Georgia has currently has a 6-week ban. But they are not, we are hopeful that they will not completely ban abortion in the state, because it'll make it easier for women to get to the state of Georgia, which is about a 7-hour drive, versus the almost 12-hour drive to New Mexico. The last thing I want to kind of leave you guys with, because I want to stay inside of my time constraints, is that a longitudinal study performed at the University of California at San Francisco by the Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health found that denying a woman an abortion creates economic hardship and insecurity, go figure, but that lasts for almost 10 years. And this is why. When women were turned away and went on to give birth, and they experienced an increase in household poverty lasting for a minimum of 4 years. That included a lowering of the woman's credit score by 50 to 100 points. It also increased the amount of debt women were accruing longitudinally, and then there was an increase of the negative. There was an increase of the negative public financial records. And when I dug more into that, what you find is that these women, as the professor from Middlebury has explained, is that women, if the abortion is banned, it doesn't then mean that they don't seek other means. And so what happens is they try to go to these private companies or these private facilities to try to get these abortions, and then they rack up this debt that then ends up on their credit report, and then can be seen as delinquent collections, etc. Right? And this longitudinal study shows this quite drastically. And there is a woman who requested an abortion that went on to have this child. And this is where I want to leave you guys, because I want you to think about it this way. Were 4 times more likely to have a bankruptcy on their credit or be evicted from their housing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we go? Yeah, let's go. Okay, and then we, as you like. Yeah. It's Abidemi next. Yeah, I think we have Abidemi next. I'm not doing a proper job of chairing this panel. I should have given the floor to Caitlyn Myers, saying that she's one of the economists who contributed to the amicus brief to the Supreme Court by economists and from Middlebury College. And Sherice is with Southern University, based in Baton Rouge, and she's a recent member of IAFFE. She's very welcome. So we're very happy to have her. And thanks go to Caroline Hussein for making the connection, and also to Yana Rogers and Kate Bond for making the connection with Caitlyn Myers. So we're very thankful. So next, our speaker is Abidemi Fasanmi. Abidemi, can you hear me? Yeah, you're
Yes,
there. Abidemi is the only non-economist on the panel. She's a medical doctor, a professor of health policy and public administration. She is originally from Nigeria, so she will be talking about Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa, but currently she is based at St. George University in Grenada in the West Indies. Abidemi,
yeah. Thank
hi.
you so
Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. So I'll just dive into the conversation. And I'm really very happy about the statistics that, I learned about in what's happening with abortion. I mean, the abortion part and trail and tracking, and I'm really very interested in that. So going
Abidemi,
to what
I'm
I
sorry,
do.
I'm gonna interrupt for a second. You're breaking off, so maybe it's better with the camera turned off because it was better when we did the trial.
Okay, I'll do that. Is it better now?
This seems to be better now. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this is a very wonderful opportunity to have this conversation, and I like the way that we've started it with the data and all that, and I was really, really very keen on being part of this panel because I teach medical students. So the last speaker, Sherice, when we talked about the fact that it has a lot of ramification, but the repealing of the abortion right is not just in the limiting abortion access itself, but it's also with regards to the several ramifications that this law has on reproductive rights and reproductive justice. Coming from this global south and from sub-Saharan Africa, having practiced there, there are very terrible data that comes from there. In Nigeria alone, we have about 456,000 unsafe abortion done every year in Nigeria. And so you can imagine the amount of women that have to subject themselves to accessing abortion from unsafe places. And that's because Nigeria falls into one of those countries where abortion is only allowed when it's at the risk of the mother's life. We also have a very high maternal mortality rate, about 1,050 per 100,000 births a year. Women die during childbirth. But in this conversation, I wanted to bring a little bit of a divergence. And that's also linking it to Ipek's first presentation that talked about the moral and the dilemma that comes with abortion and about accessing abortion rights. So it's not only about having these services available, but also how do we break, because I'm coming from a health perspective and I'm thinking about all the cases that I've met. How do you break the moral, how will I say, like the moral rope, or what the barrier that aspect of morality creates, and also makes people, even when they have the choice, they would rather not want to do it because it's something seen or viewed as not a very good thing to do. And so I'm coming in there from that perspective because I've had conversations with my medical students talking about what are the ethical dilemmas that you face, particularly now in the US, that there is this law. As a medical doctor, what it does is that it ties your hand. And I've had that feeling, I've had that experience before when I've had people come to my clinic when I was practicing in Nigeria, and it has several layers of ramification, not just for the person seeking abortion services, but even the providers and what it could do to their career and in terms of their license being seized. One of the things that I had observed practicing in the clinical sector and also in public health is that the reproductive labor is grossly tied to reproductive rights. And one of the things that we have failed to do, or has proved very difficult, in doing is how do you separate that reproductive labor, or how do you even within the reproductive labor make valuable the need to have access to this sort of service. Let me give examples. In Nigeria, there are farming communities, and farming communities depend on human labor. So the human labor is the productive labor that comes with the production of the goods. And so having children and giving birth is actually viewed as an obligation in that community for the sustenance and the subsistence of the continuity of that society. And so you find women tied in this circle that is not just something of their choice, but it's something that has to do with value, the value system of the society. And the value system of the society is also tied to the economic production of goods or services. And so that becomes a challenge. In Western countries where you have things like social security, it's something that people can tap into. In most of the global South, like in Nigeria, go back to Nigerian example, again, having children is also a social capital. It's an economic as well as a social capital, because having children, particularly if depending on whether it's a boy or a girl, gives you access to certain types of resources. And so this is where we have the challenge of how do we push for policies, because I've seen where women are also at the front row in preventing abortion and abortion rights. So the question I ask myself all the time is, we are all women, but we take opposing sides. What is that one thing that can bring us together and prove to show that policies that give access or reproductive rights to all women is for the good of all? But these are a few things that have come that I have thought about over time in my career, and I've always wondered, what is that link? What is that thing that can be the bridge or the divide that can pull women together? Because even when you look at the abortion law that was repealed, this was a 47-year-old law. And at the time when this law was passed, it was a predominantly male Supreme Court justice. We still have a similar reflection, but what has changed? It's something that has to do with what the societal value, what the society places in terms of what is the value of life, what is the value of the bodies of women. Women's bodies have always been the places where battles on policy, on politics have been fought. And so I would want us to consider that in this conversation. I do not want to take too much time, and I know that I have not said so much in terms of like the economic, but I'm trying to bring out this ethical issues, because there are issues that have been clogs in the wheel of having sexual or reproductive rights and having people on opposing poles. And it's not just having men, because a lot of times state policymakers, particularly in patriarchal societies, are predominantly male. But what we also see is that we have increasingly women that are beginning to take very conservative stance and opposing some of these rights. And we've seen that having access to this is just a good thing, because it allows people to have safe healthcare services, to be provided with the kinds of healthcare services that they need, so that they would not have the complications that come with unsafe abortion. Another thing that I had been thinking about and I thought of, I actually wrote something, but from all the conversations, I just felt I needed to veer away and raise this question, is that one of the things that we also need to understand, or that I've observed, is the politics of resource. how does the politics of resource play into how people are drawn into one type of policy or the other? I'll give an example. When you look at the demographic transition across countries, in Africa, it's more of having younger people, and so and thinner upwards. That's older people are less than younger people. But in some countries, what you have is a heavy top that is more of elderly. The fertility rates of women are reducing, and so they have less younger people. And so what does that mean in economic terms? And how does that sort of demographic transition have its impact on how issues around reproductive rights of women are viewed, because women are carriers of babies and the ones that help in sustaining societies by having the children. So these are some of the things that come up to my mind. And I also think about the reproductive labor, because reproductive labor, women that
Abidemi,
are happy.
Abidemi,
Yes.
Can we wrap up in 1 minute, because we're over time now?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
So how do we view the reproductive labor of women, which is invisible? And I talked about farming communities where women are child bearers, and so they're putting in reproductive labor and also the productive labor in terms of farming and all that. But these are all within an informal sector, and it's an invisible sort of labor. And I think having some understanding of framework that links all this and ties it to the benefits might be a way to go. And now I'll leave it there. And I hope that we can generate some conversations. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Abidemi. Thank you. So now we move on to Camila Baron, who's an economist and a journalist, an IAFFE member, and she's with IDEAS-UNSAM in Argentina. Camila, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I would like to start thanking IAFFE and especially Ipek for this invitation. It's a great honor to share this panel with so many colleagues working on reproductive justice. I call this presentation The Long Fight for Abortion in Argentina, the massification of the debate and why economic justice was at the center of the demand. In Argentina, since 1921, abortion has been decriminalized in specific cases when the life of the mother was at risk and when the pregnancy was due to a rape. 2005 study estimated that between 300,000 and 500,000 abortions occur on a yearly basis in a country with a population of 35 million people. In other words, almost 1 in 3 women in Argentina would have undergone an abortion in her life. So in 2016, a report from the Ministry of Health showed that the number of 43 deaths of women due to abortion in that year being the main cause of maternal death. So to understand what type of law was conquered in 2020 in Argentina and why we can say that economic justice was at the central issue from the beginning of the struggle, it is necessary to tell the story of the militancy that gave rise to it. It is necessary to start talking about the national campaign for legal abortion and the links between feminist, social movements, and human rights organizations in Argentina. In Argentina, there have been national women's meetings, we call Encuentros Nacionales de Mujeres in Spanish, since 1985, which only stopped during the 2 years of the pandemic. Each year, they are held in a different state. They began as discussion meetings between 100 and 200 women, and in the latest editions, they gather more than 100,000 women and LGBT. So most of you probably know the symbol of the green scarf, but perhaps you might not be aware of its history. It would I would then like to briefly comment on how the national campaign for legal abortion originated in Argentina, which after 15 years of struggle managed to win a law in December 2020, a law that it is a leading case both for the region and for other countries, I think. So the attendance at the national meetings of women multiplied close to the enormous economic crisis that Argentina suffered in 2001, which led more than half of the population to fall below the poverty line. So the newcomers were mainly women from social organizations who had been taking care of getting food and the most basic things for their families in a context of increasing unemployment. So there occurred a fundamental intersection between the historical feminist demands and the women most affected by the crisis. So poor women were the ones who had the worst complications after abortions, the ones who put their lives at risk, and the ones that went into debt to pay for these practices. So in those years, the movement got a sexual and reproductive health law passed, providing free contraceptives, but still with no chance to debate access to abortion. A few years later, in 2005, in the context of another national meeting of women, where the different strategies to achieve an abortion law were already being discussed for years, the National Campaign for Legal Abortion was created. Initially, it was made up of around 70 human rights, political, social organizations, and also feminist leaders. The green handkerchief was chosen as an emblem in honor of the handkerchief of the suffragettes, the white handkerchief of the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, that were the great fighters of human rights in Argentina. So green was chosen to distinguish itself from other political colors and also a symbol of hope. Sex education to decide, contraceptives not to abort, legal abortion not to die was the slogan of the campaign. And one of its strategies was the presentation every year for over 10 years of a bill draft by the campaign in the National Congress. During this time, big progresses were made. In 2006, the law on sexual education was passed. In 2012, a ruling by the court held the state responsible for access to abortion in legal cases. Care protocols were created along with various groups and organizations to support and train specialized professionals. Among them, the organizations that provide accompaniment to women who want an abortion stand out. So in 2018, the bill for abortion rights gained support to be discussed for the first time in the Congress, but despite the massive mobilizations of over 1 million people, the law was rejected in the Senate. However, this process activists grow exponentially, and soon it was born what became known throughout the world as the Green Tide. The feminist organizations and collectives articulated around the demand for abortion multiplied: artists, students, journalists, union leaders, caregivers, teachers, health professionals, etc. So at this time, something that explains the ability of feminism to build hegemony was put in place. I have called it strategic pragmatism, as it comprises broad articulations even between sectors that are not at all related to other feminist struggles, such as right-wing parties and religious sectors in pursuit of an strategic objective. That means to completely change the conception of pregnancy as a compulsory maternity. During the treatment of the bill at the Congress, hundreds of people exposed for and against the law. This democratic and open debate was very important to listen to stories and experiences of doctors, patients, activists, etc. It was an example of participatory democracy. Never before has the Argentinian society been so involved in a parliamentary debate. So between 2018, the first time the law was discussed, and 2020, when it was finally approved, what we did was to get abortion out of the closet. So this implied that the entire society had to assume these three things. One, that abortion is something close and daily for everyone. So even if they try to silence it. Two, it cuts across social classes. And three, money facilitates access to a safe abortion, while the lack of resources condemns those who must perform it in poor conditions to health complications, even leading to death. So this legislation was essential to position abortion as a matter of economic justice and distributive justice. Business around clandestine abortion was discussed. The more expensive, the safer. The fewer resources, the riskier the practices. The dangerous techniques which women were subjected daily were evidenced: needles, parsley, hangers, surgical intervention in places without asepsis. So the historical demand included the conception of abortion as a public issue and therefore as a practice to be guaranteed by the states. In Argentina, the health system has three modalities. The public system.
Can you hear me?
See,
Time is up. Can you wrap up, please?
Okay. So just to go to the conclusions, I ran out of time. So the feminist movement in Argentina, the fight for legal abortion means so much more than a demand for reproductive justice itself. For many years, despite its illegality, safe abortion was linked to availability of economic resources. So, long-standing tradition of conceiving education and health as human rights made it easier for feminists to articulate with other political actors in the struggle to push for free and universal access to abortion. So, at the present, the main challenges are to defend budget allocations for effective compliance of abortion law throughout the country, and to control illegal acts committed by fundamentalist groups that obstruct access to sexual education and the right of access to abortion. So I'd like to say that for those of us who choose economics as a profession because we dream of building a world with well-being for everyone, we must keep in mind to what extent it is only possible to do if maternity and paternity are desired and held in decent conditions. So it is worth asking repeatedly, what would the world be like if each person who came to birth did so within a framework of desire and with the possibility of receiving the necessary care? So this is perhaps one of those questions that explains why feminists are currently one of the few political movements with the capacity to build ideas for the future. So that's all. Thank you, and I'm sorry for the long.
Thank you, Camila. The example of Argentina gives us a light of hope, and next rally we all wear the green handkerchiefs. So now on to Marcella Corsi from University of Sapienza, Rome, a long-time member of IAFFE.
Back to the old continent.
Back to the old continent.
Well, yeah, I've been asked to talk about Europe, and as you see, I'm mostly concentrating on the European Union. But finally, of course, I will talk about my own country, that is, as you certainly know, the headquarters of patriarchy, since we host the Vatican. So everything starts from there in centuries and centuries and centuries. So we are quite central for this topic, and not only for this topic. So I start with a statement that I think we all agree about. Abortion access is key to economic freedom. That's why we're talking about that today here. And this is very important to remember, to remind to all our colleagues, also the ones that are not here with us today or were not with us yesterday. The many who escaped, actually, when we were trying to give them our leaflets with our statements. So there are some key issues that obviously we don't have the time to discuss here today, but certainly we will do in the next months, also with the special issue of feminist economics. So, actually what we are wearing, most of us refer really directly to that. Freedom of choice, or as we were saying yesterday, they say no choice, we say pro-choice, is crucial for economics since the origin of our discipline. There are many factors behind the choice for a woman to abort, not to abort the homo economicus, unfortunately, because we keep on using it, but for financial and socioeconomic factors that have been analyzed, by the way, by the discipline in some, of course, not many, unfortunately, but some important contribution to the literature. And so it's quite clear for all of us, at least here, that to any ban, any limitation to abortion is a limitation to freedom, which means, of course, also, and there's a strong implication for the life of all women, all human beings involved in this issue. But we will come back to that, hopefully, with a special issue of feminist economics. We have to frame this in a general context. Europe, of course, is part of it, but all our countries are part of it. And the main reference for me in coming here was the Nairobi statement of the International Conference on Population and Development, 25 years after the first important statements in Cairo in 1994. The statement and the second report of the high-level commission just came out in 2022, and most of the references actually come from that report that is freely available online. I'm pretty sure that then the slides will be distributed and all these links are there for all of us. I don't have the time to read the statements, of course, just have a look by yourself because we have 7 minutes and I will stick on that. But as you can see, there is a long list of de jure statements that all our countries should contribute to. And concerning Europe, obviously there is an important amendment by the Council of Europe that is, by the way, made by the representative of all member countries of the European Union, so the whole continent, as I was saying. Then we have a very important resolution signed in 2021 by the European Parliament concerning the situation of sexual and reproductive health and rights in the European Union, totally in accordance with the Nairobi statement that I mentioned before, and also by the statement of the Council of Europe that was before that. Once again, here you have a very important quotation and also references available online for this. This is just to say that in principle, all our countries agree that reproductive rights is crucial for every human being in our countries. But there is a great but, of course, as Ipek was already mentioning in her introduction, of course. When we come to the application and therefore to the practice of this the Euro statement, then the problems arise quite clearly. Another map, not the same map used by Ipek. This concerns another source of information, once again, freely available. This is the contraception policy atlas for Europe, and actually is a Europe is an enlarged Europe, as you can see. It actually covers 41 countries. Some of them are missing just because of the slides, but the other countries that are over there on the right are the Caucasus countries, so Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia. But in any case, you have the full list here on the left, even if they're very small, so you cannot read them, but you will find them in the slides. So, and as you can see, the picture is extremely diverse according to the different countries. The green one, of course, are the one in which the principle that we were reminding up to now are actually applied, more or less, because in any case, the percentage are not 100, as you can see. These are the percentage of people covered by the contraception policies, which means that are people well informed. And to be well informed, of course, means to be able then to make a free choice. While in other countries, and as you can see, the scale goes into the deep red of Poland and Russia. And Poland is part of the European Union, is part of those statements that I reminded before. Unfortunately, people are not informed enough. And certainly not in line with the promises of the Euro statements mentioned before. Where is Italy? Because now I come to my country in the few minutes left. Is in yellow. The Vatican is there, I told you before, and obviously this has a strong effect. We cannot speak about contraception in our schools because the Vatican is against it. So there is of course free contraception under certain limits. Actually, here I have also some statistics if you want. According to that source of information, I can tell you that out of 40, not 41, but 46 countries covered by the study, out of 46 countries, 19 countries, so 41%, cover contraception in their national health systems. 13 countries, 28%, cover contraception in the national health system for young people to 25 years old or older. 41 countries cover counseling within the national health system, and 18 countries provide governmental websites. Italy, as I said, is one of the critical countries. As a matter of fact, the full implementation of the Nairobi commitments are still far from being achieved. The overall score for Italy is 59.3%. And more important, the family advisory centers, what we call the consultori, which are, by the way, the healthcare facilities responsible for multidisciplinary assistance for sexual and reproductive health, are going to be closed quite soon because of lack of financial support by the Ministry of Health. This is not something that I say. This is written in a report written by the Istituto Superiore di Sanità, so the main institution in Italy for this, for every topic concerns to health, in 2019. So this is something that was written according to the lack of funding for these very important institutions in my country. The access to abortion is regulated by a law, but as a matter of fact, there are enormous problems in the application of this law because of the so-called objector doctors. So according to the law, gynecologists can decide not to work, not to be involved in abortion. This is their freedom to choice. I don't have time to discuss too much about what is behind this freedom of choice. Most of them work in private clinics and they do it, but anyway, they don't do it in public hospitals. And this is particularly critical in the south of Italy. As you can see, there are 60% of gynecologists that are objectors in Italy, with peaks of 80% in regions like Basilicata, Campania, Molise, and Sicily. For those of you who know Italy, this is the south of our country. And other forms of dualism that concerns also the health system. And now let's come to, and I finish with this, let's come to the present. We have a new government in Italy. It's the first time that we have a woman prime minister, but unfortunately, is a right-wing prime minister. She's called Giorgia Meloni, and she's a pro-life activist since the beginning, since a long time. She was there in Verona when there was a very important meeting of the pro-life movement from all over the world. She was there speaking. And these are posters, not the one that we were showing last night, but that you could see in our country, in my town, in Rome, everywhere. Few months ago, then eventually there was, of course, the feminist movement obviously asked for their elimination, but they were everywhere, and I will translate it for you just to give you an idea of what it's written about. This is saying you want to give more power to women, let them have birth. So basically, the fact that we don't have women in power is because we have abortion, according to them. And this was written the 8th of March. This was a poster for the 8th of March. Everywhere in town, I'm not saying in a corner. This says that abortion is the first cause of femicide. This one says, and remind actually the words of a very important poet, a gay poem that was killed for his ideas, but anyway, he was against abortion. Of course, it's legal to be against abortion for everybody, but of course, this is just something that they use. Certainly, they don't like Paolo Pasolini for other reasons, but it was good to quote him for this reason. And it's, I'm against abortion. And finally, of course, I can do it. How could be possible a word without a mother? That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcella. You should have had Argentina lost to finish on a high note. Okay, as our last speaker, we now have Rebeca Betancourt Gomez from University of Lyon. She's a board member of IAFFE, and this time Rebeca will tell us about her research, her and her colleagues' research on abortion and gender economic justice in the history of economic thought. So it will be a more historical perspective than a geographic perspective.
Yes. So probably, no, I don't need to touch it. Okay, perfect. Well, probably my presentation will be a positive note because I'm here today asking for contributions and to come back to the past and see when abortion became illegal, why once in different countries, in the laws of different countries, abortion became illegal, and how we obtain the legal rights of abortion in different countries, and why we can lose our rights. So this is a presentation to ask your help because there are not too many historians of economics probably in the room. But in your articles on applied microeconomics or different, we need more hair stories about women's rights, LGBT, because today we talk a lot about women on abortion, but these also are rights for transgender people. And for me, this is very important to say this word because actually, in history, we cannot find too many examples, but current debates also concern LGBTA plus people. So there are many recent histories with different emphasis on, for example, non-binary people and trying to rewrite history to include other debates that are completely absent in traditional handbooks that are only on Smith, Ricardo, Marx, Keynes, whatever. And for example, the last one of the very recent is by Eddie Keeper, who is here, who did a lot of work trying to, including women writings, women's stories, and other people from other part of the world, not only from the global north, and in particular from United States or England, because if we work in history of economic thought, it's 18th century England or French. But we actually, sorry. I can do with it. Okay. Yeah. But actually, the recent debates, on reproductive rights around the world show us that we really need to put the attention on other part of the world, like Africa, India, and of course, I'm concerned because I was born in Venezuela, so in Latin America, but actually, for example, in France, we just vote, so the first part of the vote, we need now the second one, to put the legal abortion rights in the constitution, because we don't know if we can have a president like in Italy for the very extreme right win, so we vote that to write the abortion is legal in France in the constitution. So we are in this process. But to the question that Ipek asked me to try to answer, what is the state of affair in the reproductive rights and gender equality from the point of view of a historian of economic thought, is that we teach about this in our history of economics course about right of abortion, or link with population control, and there is still too much work to do it because it's completely absent of all the courses in history of economic, of all the books. So we need more history to include these kind of discussions. Thank you. So the link between reproductive rights and economic well-being is actually very well developed, in particular from 18th century until today economists. But the right of choice in childbearing, we can find this in Wollstonecraft, we can find this in John Stuart Mill, and in particular, the link between the decision to have kids and the importance of the economic independence or economic empowerment, or as you want to say, but also in Knock Wicksell and in Charlotte Perkin Gilman, among others. Okay, so the importance to have the decision to decide how many kids we want to have or not, and also the family limitation, the quantity of the kind of family that we want to have is also present on some economists as Alfred Marshall or Pareto. So this is a very recent research that we are starting, and it's a collective research. So if you are interested, of course, you can join us. And also the contemporary studies evince what was well understood by early economists, that effective family planning included access to legal abortion. Including the possibility to decide to have health care is associated with increased wages, higher family incomes, greater labor force participation rates, and expanded human capital investment. So these are topics that we can find if we go to Malthus, if we go to Marshall, if we go to... So this is something that now we have to put the glass and to reread the authors looking for these debates and trying to include these in our courses. So the issue of reproductive rights intersects with current research programs that are looking to include women contribution to economic thought, and also to more women economics writings, and also writings that come from other part of the world, not only for the global north. And this is why, with the support of the History of Economic Society, what I'm also part of, and the master degree that I direct in Lyon, so I'm the director, so I can include this in my syllabus, in my courses. We are hosting a series of webinars that bring together historian of economic thought, applied economists, as for example, Caitlyn, she's one of our guests, and I invite before Ipek invited her. Long time ago. And demographers, doctors too, because in history is actually very important, because we can have journals, personal journals, the doctors, psychologists, etc. We have different kind of sources, autobiographical, personal journals, etc. And for us, what is important is also the political link, because the period that generally historian of economics we study are 18th, 19th century, beginning of 20, even if there are many history of recent economics. But, before this, what we do, the name was called political economy. And the links between economics and political were super clear. And, for us, is very important that this is a financial and economics and a business debate, but it's something that come in a presidential election that is debating in the parliament, that is, is not only an economics and a business thing, it's a very political. And there is a rhetoric that is behind that we are very interested to analyze. So only to finish, I will show you here, but I will put it online, the series of webinars that we have. The first one is one of my colleagues that we are organizing is on VIXEL, procreation and population. There is also by Miriam Barkomsky on Marshall. There is Kathleen Myers that intervenes in the webinar February 15, Myra Pineda Torres, Jimena Repo, Eddie Keeper, Melanie Gildy, Cleo Chassonnery, on different authors, different periods, but of course, this is a research program. You are all more than welcome to join. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all for these very interesting interventions. Unfortunately, we're almost over time, but maybe a few questions or comments before we move to the next room for reception.